Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 9, Lecture Part 2. So in the second part, we're going to go through and talk about these four major electrolytes, sodium, potassium, chloride, and phosphorus. And then we're going to talk about some disorders and diseases associated with fluid and electrolyte imbalance or deficiency. So first we'll start with sodium. And just a little review, sodium is a cation, and it tends to exist at rest, like at homeostasis. We're going to find sodium outside the cell. So we call sodium the major extracellular cation. As we saw, sodium functions to help maintain fluid balance inside and outside the cell. Sodium is also going to help in blood pressure regulation. Remember, as we reabsorb sodium from the kidneys, water is going to follow. And so if we have low blood pressure and we're reabsorbing sodium from the kidneys, we're helping to retain water in the body to help bring blood volume and therefore blood pressure back up. We also talked about how sodium works in maintaining polarization and depolarization of our neurons, so thereby assisting in that neurotransmission or the transmission of nerve signals along the nervous system. And in the same way, when we have neuromuscular communication, that also involves sodium in that signaling between the nerve cell and the muscle cell. And then the one thing we didn't see, but another important role of sodium in the body is to assist in glucose absorption from our digestive system. So in the small intestine, sodium assists in this process of glucose absorption into the enterocyte. So what's the RDA for sodium? Well, in this case, we have actually what's considered an adequate intake and an RDA. So the adequate intake is 1.5 grams per day or 1,500 milligrams. The dietary guidelines recommend keeping sodium to not more than 2.3 grams per day. So this is 2,300 milligrams. Furthermore, it's recommended that anyone who already has high blood pressure, should reduce their sodium intake. So for folks who have high blood pressure, sodium should stay below this adequate intake. So sodium should be not more than 1,500 milligrams per day, which is 1.5 grams per day. Sodium we find in most foods anyhow, so it's pretty easy to get our sodium requirement for the day. However, in the United States, we often take in too much sodium, and that's because we take in so many processed foods, fast foods, and restaurant meals. Most of these foods are very high in sodium and also relatively low in potassium. So in the United States, we do tend to see an overconsumption of sodium. This can be helpful for anybody who does have high blood pressure or who needs to or is trying to reduce their sodium intake for any reason. Just looking at some commonly high sodium foods, you'll see a lot of this is canned or preserved in some way. Sodium is a preservative. And then on the right side, just some lower sodium versions of that. So again, in most cases, just choosing low sodium options or less processed options. Like we might not think of ham as processed, but it is actually pretty processed compared to just a fresh cut of meat from the pig. And you'll see here the difference in 3 ounces of ham versus 3 ounces of pork. You've got a pretty significant difference in total sodium content. So you can go down and take a look at some of those differences. So what are the issues of consuming too much sodium? As I said, we tend to consume too much in the United States. So first and foremost, we just have an increased risk for hypertension, which is high blood pressure, and also increased risk for cardiovascular disease when potassium intake is also low. Again, this is often associated with heavily processed foods diet. So hypernatremia is the word given to high sodium. Again, hyper meaning too much, And natremia is referring to sodium in the blood. So hypernatremia, meaning we have too much sodium in the blood, too much sodium in the body. Anyone who is also suffering from congestive heart failure or kidney disease is going to be, their body is already going to be not managing sodium status so well. They're going to see a decreased efficiency with sodium excretion from the kidneys. So this would be another, these would be two other cases where someone should follow a low sodium diet. Anyone who already has hypertension, anyone who is at risk or has cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, or congestive heart failure should follow that 1,500 milligrams or 1.5 grams per day sodium recommendation. So hypernatremia, a high blood sodium, can cause high blood pressure, high blood volume, high blood pressure, and can cause edema, which is this excess fluid retention. Again, because water is going to follow these electrolytes. So if we're consuming way more sodium than we need, we're going to retain way more water than we need to. So we're going to see swelling. And you can see that, like, you can even pay attention to your own body. If you eat, you know, a restaurant meal, for example, or you eat a bunch of chips one night, or just something that's very salty, or if you do have some ham, notice your body, particularly the next day. You might notice, like, your face might look a little bit swollen or puffy, maybe even your neck, your hands, your fingers. So you can notice edema, you know, mild edema, because it will happen just from a given meal or, you know, a given high sodium day. So certainly that's okay, you know, if it's happening once in a while. But we can certainly see severe cases of edema for anybody who might be consuming, you know, a very high sodium diet on a daily basis. And then on the flip side, what happens if we don't consume enough sodium? So the term here is hyponatremia, which is abnormally low, hypo meaning low blood sodium levels. So this can arise from prolonged exercise where you're sweating profusely, and then also from vomiting or diarrhea, anywhere where you're going to have a lot of water loss and electrolyte loss. Hang on here. One second. Okay, sorry. The joys of recording from home when the door knocks mid-lecture. Okay, so what are the symptoms of hyponatremia? Symptoms are going to include headache, dizziness, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, and muscle cramps. So again, anywhere where we need sodium for that nerve impulse transmission or neuromuscular functioning, you'll see a lot of these are related to the nervous system and muscular functioning. Severe cases of hyponatremia can result in death, seizures, and coma. So hyponatremia, both hypo and hypernatremia are pretty serious conditions, and you know, we can get into mild states of hypo and hypernatremia periodically, but certainly if these conditions are unchecked, right, or if someone is having like really profuse vomiting or diarrhea or doing really intense exercise and not replenishing their body, this can lead to pretty serious complications. All right, so on to potassium. So potassium is our other cation, meaning positively charged. Potassium exists opposite to sodium. And you can hopefully remember that just because we often talk about sodium-potassium channels. And so in order to like have channels, really, you can kind of think, okay, well, they need to exist then on opposite sides of the channel, right? Or else we're not really creating a channel. So sodium exists extracellularly, potassium exists intracellularly, and again, that's at rest. So together with sodium, potassium, as we saw, helps to maintain fluid balance. Again, wherever these electrolytes are, water will follow. Again, in sodium, potassium pumps, and that electrical charge of the neuron, we see these nerve impulse transmissions and, again, communication of the nervous system, as well as communication of the nervous system to our muscular system, so helping with muscular contraction. And then high potassium intake can actually help keep blood pressure lower, kind of by having a somewhat of an opposite or like a neutralizing effect with sodium. So again, in the United States, when we have such severe cases of hypertension, high blood pressure, it's in part because of the high sodium content of our diets, also in part because our diets tend to be lower in potassium. At least when I say our, I'm meaning like the standard American diet. What's the recommendation for potassium? So the RDA for potassium is 4.7 grams per day. You'll see that's about double what the RDA is for sodium. Food sources of potassium. Most of our food is pretty plentiful. So potassium, plentiful for potassium. So we find potassium in fruits and vegetables, beans and legumes, as well as our whole grains. Where processed foods tend to increase sodium concentration because sodium is a preservative, and it's also, people have come to really like the taste of sodium. Processed foods tend to lose potassium content. So again, in the standard American diet, we tend to have too much sodium and too little potassium. And the reality is we actually need twice the potassium relative to the amount of sodium that we get. Again, a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables are going to be good sources of potassium. But if you look here, let me take a look at like one banana, right? We think of bananas as being good potassium sources. So we could say about 400 milligrams in one banana, but we need 4.7 grams, right? So this is why eating fresh fruits and vegetables, one of the reasons why eating fresh fruits and vegetables is so important, is to help increase potassium intake and thereby balance sodium-potassium content in the body. What happens if we have too much potassium? So again, hyper, and then kalemia. Don't confuse this with calcemia. Kalemia is referring to potassium. If you remember in the periodic table of elements, potassium is abbreviated with the letter K. So that's this hyperkalemia is referring to too much potassium. So high blood potassium levels. So this can be dangerous because this can affect heart rhythms and can result in heart attack and death. So hyperkalemia, too much potassium, can lead to arrhythmias or abnormal heart rhythms. Also, again, because the kidney is the organ that filters our blood and filters our urine, anybody who has kidney disease is going to have an increased difficulty regulating blood potassium levels. And so they should avoid consuming potassium-containing salt substitutes because they might wind up with excessively high blood potassium levels because they're unable to filter out that excess potassium. And then the opposite, if we don't consume enough potassium, this would be hypo, too little, too low, kalemia, so too low potassium in the body. We see this for people who, again, have a kidney disease and potentially aren't able to reabsorb potassium out of the kidneys. We can also see this in diabetic ketoacidosis, so where the diabetes has gone on so long without proper management or regulation that the body starts to break down those fatty acids as an energy substrate, and we start to see this buildup of these ketone bodies or ketoacids in the blood, which increase the acidity of the blood. So This can result in hypokalemia, low blood potassium levels. Diuretics can also result in hypokalemia because many diuretics work by causing the body to excrete more potassium, which causes water to follow. So by excreting more potassium, we excrete more water, and we get rid of some of the water. So again, diuretics can lead to low potassium levels in the blood. And then other examples, other issues that might cause low potassium, again, would be extreme dehydration, vomiting and diarrhea, excessive alcohol abuse, and an interesting one, long-term consumption of natural licorice, and again, potentially eating disorders. So many instances in which we see the result being low blood potassium. And then chloride. So chloride is our major extracellular anion. So extracellular meaning outside the cell. So sodium and chloride exist together outside of the cell at rest. Chloride also assists with fluid balance in the body, also assists with nerve impulse transmission. Another function of chloride in the body is that hydrochloric acid in the stomach. And then chloride also supports the immune system. We have an adequate intake for chloride, which is 2.3 grams per day, the same really as sodium. So too much chloride can result in hypertension, especially in somebody who is already salt sensitive. The primary place where we get chloride in the diet is table salt, so sodium chloride. And if we don't have enough chloride, we're going to see, we see low body chloride, again, resulting from dehydration, vomiting, excessive diarrhea, and again, eating disorders. So in any case where we see not enough chloride or not enough potassium, we're going to see similar symptoms as we saw with sodium. So irregular fluid balance, we might see improper digestion, we might see weakened immune system, we might see like twitching and issues of the nervous system. And then phosphorus. So phosphorus exists with potassium inside the cell. Phosphorus is the major intracellular anion, so negatively charged, just like chloride. Again, phosphorus assists in fluid balance. And then we're also going to see, we talked about phosphorylation and dephosphorylation when we talked about metabolic pathways. So that those types of chemical reactions use phosphorus. And phosphorylation and dephosphorylation are often reactions that are activating or deactivating enzymes. We also saw phosphorylation in the process of glycolysis. And then we're also going to find phosphorus in adenosine triphosphate, ATP, our energy currency. DNA and RNA have phosphorus. Anywhere we have phospholipids, so like our cell membranes, that's where we have phosphorus in the body. And lipoproteins, you might remember, also had a phosphate head. And then we'll talk about bones in the next couple of weeks, next week, I guess, when we talk, we'll talk about bones coming up. And we'll see that we actually do store some phosphorus in our bones. So when we talk about bone mineral density, phosphorus is one of the minerals that we're talking about. The RDA for phosphorus is 700 milligrams per day. This is the lowest of the four. Phosphorus is pretty abundant in our foods. Any of our like higher protein foods, especially animal products, are good sources of phosphorus. We do also find phosphorus, though, of course, in lots of different plants. Again, maybe not surprisingly, in places where protein is more abundant, so beans, whole grains, and nuts. And in plants, we find phosphorus existing as phytic acid. And then many soft drinks also have a lot of phosphorus added to them. Not that soft drinks should be the source of your phosphorus, but they can. Excess consumption of soft drinks can actually lead to excessively high body phosphorus content. Yep, so again, food sources for phosphorus. Here's your RDA. So what happens if we have too much phosphorus? Again, we're seeing issues of the muscular and nervous system, muscle spasms and convulsions. High blood phosphorus can be more common for folks, again, who have kidney disease, and can also become an issue for anybody who's taking too much of a vitamin D supplement. And then if we don't consume enough phosphorus, we don't know so much about having insufficient phosphorus intake. It's pretty rare. So we don't have much to say here on too low phosphorus intake at this point. Alrighty, so now we can discuss some of the disorders related to fluid and electrolyte imbalance. So we'll go over, there's 8 here, so we'll go over all of these in more detail. And then, yeah, just a one-page chart here. So percentages of body fluid loss correlated with weight loss and symptoms. So this is kind of an interesting, helpful chart for understanding the very serious potential consequences of dehydration. So the 2 middle columns here are showing you, depending on a rough body weight. So if you weigh around 160 pounds or around 130 pounds, if you were to lose 1 to 2% of your total body fluid, you'd be losing 1.3 to 2.6 pounds if you weighed 130. If you weighed 160 and you lost 1 to 2% of your body fluid, you'd be losing 1.6 to 3.2 pounds. So this amount of body loss could happen from, an hour of moderate intensity exercise, moderate to vigorous intensity exercise. So what would be the result of that amount of body fluid loss? Well, strong thirst, certainly. You might even feel kind of uncomfortable, like if you've ever exercised, like a relatively high intensity, you might feel physically uncomfortable. You might also not really feel like eating when you finish that exercise. But it's actually really critical to replenish water and also, as soon as is possible, calories too. And so then you can go down this list and see with like increased percentage body water loss, what the symptoms would be. So to lose 3 to 5% of your body fluid loss, like if we go back to one of the pictures from part 1, like that person who looked like maybe they were running a marathon, right? Maybe over the course of that race, they've lost 3% of their body fluid, or potentially 4 or 5%. So we would see definitely dry mouth, definitely reduced urine output, and difficulty working and concentrating. The skin might become a little flushed, like red. Extremities might tingle, like fingers and toes, even the arms a little bit. They'd be emotionally unstable, so, not able to manage emotions very well. There could also be some nausea, definitely some impatience. That's the word I want there. Yeah, irritability, and sleepiness for sure. So then as water loss becomes more and more severe, and maybe this is caused by excessive diarrhea or vomiting. So we would eventually see an increased body temperature that won't go down. That's going to be correlated with an increased heart rate and respiratory rate, definitely dizziness, starting to slur their speech, mental confusion. So not just difficulty concentrating, but now like actually being confused. Potentially not being able to say their name or their birthday, very severe muscle weakness, so potentially not being able to stand up. You might even see lips turn blue. And then when dehydration gets very, very severe, we can see like complete delirium, muscle spasms, total lack of balance, swollen tongue. We might even see kidney failure. And then we're ultimately going to see decreased blood volume and decreased blood pressure as a result. So worth knowing these signs and symptoms of dehydration, because oftentimes, these first few signs, people overlook them, or think that it's just something else. But a lot of folks walk around with a pretty severe dehydration just because they don't drink enough water. And then add exercise to that, and you can start to create the domino effect here if somebody's not maintaining good fluid hydration. Alrighty, so dehydration, this is what we're talking about here, occurs when fluid loss exceeds fluid intake, commonly due to heavy exercise or environmental temperatures, like very high temperatures, hot, humid, and arid environments. And then, of course, elderly and infants will be at increased risk because of reduced thermoregulatory capacity of the body. This, I think, is actually a really helpful chart to assess dehydration and hydration. So adequate hydration, this would be the color of your urine. Adequate hydration is where we have kind of like this almost not clear, but like opaque urine that maybe has a slight yellow hue to it. And so as the color becomes more and more yellow and eventually potentially orange and brown, we move through minor dehydration to severe dehydration. So on a daily basis, if you ever see your urine at this color, this is definitely a sign to drink more water. And hopefully not too many of you are seeing your urine at these colors on a routine basis, because then you're definitely in a state of pretty severe dehydration. Another issue with fluid balance is heat stroke. So heat stroke occurs from the body's inability to regulate heat. Again, we're going to see this especially in hot, humid environments. Symptoms would be an increased pulse rate, the skin being really hot and dry, of course, body temperature being really high, and potentially in severe cases, a loss of consciousness. Heat stroke can definitely be fatal during exercise in extreme heat conditions. So again, really important to note all of these signs and symptoms, especially these earlier signs, right? So heat stroke is often induced by exercising in hot environments. So some things we can do to prevent this would be to discontinue the exercise if feeling dizzy and lightheaded, or disoriented or nauseated, and then to also start replenishing fluids and to also try to cool the body down. So potentially get into, go inside where it might be cooler. If there's a little creek and you can, kind of dip your body in some cold water to cool down, do that. If you have some ice, or if you can get like a piece of, drench your t-shirt in a cold creek and then put your t-shirt on, anything to help decrease the body temperature can be really important here too. We can also find something called water intoxication. This is literally becoming intoxicated by too much water or overhydration. So this is pretty rare, but it certainly can occur. Where we've seen it more often than other places is actually hazing rituals among college students, where for whatever reason they're just drinking excessive amounts of water for some hazing ritual. What happens is that if we consume so much water, eventually the kidneys are not going to be able to excrete the water at a rate fast enough to maintain homeostasis. So what is caused ultimately is actually hyponatremia. So where the relative concentration of sodium in the blood, right? Hyponatremia is referring to sodium, where the relative concentration of blood sodium becomes much lower than the relative concentration of water in the body. So water intoxication is dangerous because it basically creates an environment of hyponatremia. And then hypertension, so we've talked a bit about hypertension so far. Hypertension is generally caused by high sodium in the body, which leads to water retention, which leads to high blood volume, which leads to high blood pressure. Hypertension can often go without symptoms, so sometimes a diagnosis is not given where it should be. But hypertension, especially ongoing hypertension, can become problematic because it increases the risk for heart disease, stroke, as well as kidney disease. So these two body systems that really rely on and regulate body sodium. Hypertension can lead to reduced brain function, impaired physical mobility, and can even, especially with stroke or heart attack or kidney disease or heart disease, can be a cause of death. So just to give some biometric numbers, normal blood pressure would look like 120 millimeters of mercury over 80. So if we have elevated blood pressure, we're going to see that like 120 to 129 over 80. And then hypertension is diagnosed when, stage 1 hypertension is diagnosed when systolic blood pressure goes above 130 and the diastolic goes above 80. Stage 2 hypertension is diagnosed a little further on when systolic blood pressure is above 140 and diastolic is above 90. What causes hypertension? Again, overconsumption of sodium can certainly be a result. Underlying kidney disease can also be a result. Sleep apnea and even chronic alcohol abuse can also be part of the reason that hypertension develops. Yeah, and it's estimated that about 2/3 of the adult population have an underlying salt sensitivity. Two-thirds of adults who have hypertension have an underlying salt sensitivity. So while we say that sometimes, sometimes we don't know the cause of hypertension, a lot of times it is this underlying salt sensitivity coupled with overconsumption of salt, meaning sodium. So what do we do about hypertension? Weight maintenance, healthy weight maintenance is a big step. Reducing sodium intake is a big step. Reducing alcohol intake is a big step. Avoiding tobacco products. Getting regular exercise, because that's going to promote better electrolyte and fluid balance. Increasing potassium intake by eating more fresh fruits and vegetables. So something called the DASH diet was developed to help address specifically hypertension. And so you can see, I think I've got 2 pages here that goes through the DASH diet plan, like a rough overview. And I think they have 7 food groups. So when we looked at the healthy eating plates, the food groups were divvied up into 4 or 5. I think this breaks it up into 7. So we have grains. We have a grains group, vegetable, fruits, dairy products, lean meats, nuts and seeds, fats and oils, and sweets. And then you can see the number of daily servings recommended and the serving sizes suggested. So again, these 3 food groups we just saw are good sources of potassium. So that's why they make up the bulk of the DASH diet. But these are not processed, like best case scenario, these are not processed grains, right? Like these would actually be cooked rice or a pasta or a different cooked grain. But ready-made cereals or like, pastries or other flour-based food products would not really be recommended here on the DASH diet. You can see 4 to 5 servings, which a serving is about 1/2 to 1 cup of vegetables, and 4 to 5 servings of fruit per day. Pretty awesome. And then you can see lean meats and poultry, 2 or less servings per day. A serving is 3 ounces. Dairy products, 2 to 3 per day. Again, making sure to choose low sodium options or making sure there's not sodium added to it. Nuts and seeds and dry beans, 4 to 5 times per week. Fats and oils, 2 to 3 per day. And then sweets, 5 per week. You can also see the sweets include some sweetened beverages and otherwise are pretty small amounts of sweets over the course of the week. And then hypertension can also be managed by medication for sure, but when medication is applied to manage hypertension, healthy lifestyle changes should also be made. And then when blood pressure can be more successfully managed through a healthful lifestyle, medication dose should be reduced and potentially stopped. Hypertension is sometimes called the silent killer, again, because there are not major overt symptoms. So this is one reason why it's really important to have blood pressure checked on a regular basis. So either using the machines at the grocery store or, of course, checking in with your primary care, 2 to 4 times a year at least. Then we can also see neuromuscular disorders associated with fluid and electrolyte imbalance. We can see seizures and muscle cramps. So seizures are uncontrollable muscle spasms, and then muscle cramps are these involuntary, also spasmodic muscle contractions. So where the muscle might contract and not let go, right? And that can be pretty painful. And again, this is in large part because when we talk about electrolyte imbalances, we're really talking about this cross communication between the nervous system and the muscular system. So whether the electrolyte imbalance is happening along the nervous system or the muscular system or both, this is why we can see these muscle spasms and then also these muscle crampings. We can also see, as we've been talking about, kidney and heart-related disorders associated with electrolyte and fluid imbalances or disorders. So as we've talked about, kidneys have a major role in regulating fluid and electrolytes, and also acid-base balance, which we just spent that one page on. So when we have kidney disorder, what can happen is edema, which is this fluid retention or swelling. And this is an edema caused by the electrolyte imbalance. And so having either, in this case, if it's edema, we have too much of these various electrolytes. Again, oftentimes sodium, too much sodium in the body can lead to fluid retention, which can lead to edema, which is this swelling. We can also see some edema with congestive heart failure. So with congestive heart failure, the heart becomes weak and doesn't adequately pump blood throughout the body. So depending on whether it's the left side or the right side of the heart, you can see edema in the body, or you can see edema actually around the lungs, depending on which side of the heart is weakened. So because we're talking about micronutrients here, we can talk a little bit about supplementation. You might remember in chapter 8, we said that with the micronutrients we talked about in chapter 8, we said that over consumption of these micronutrients really only comes about from over supplementation. And sodium is probably the one exception to this rule because we have a lot of sodium in processed foods, and in the United States, we eat a lot of processed foods. So, so we put this little bit about dietary supplements here because this is in the unit about micronutrients. So a lot of people are now supplementing with different vitamins or minerals or multivitamin in supplement form. So these supplements can come as tablets or capsules or soft gels or liquids or even powders. So supplements are regulated by the US, by the FDA, by the Food and Drug Administration. So we can take a look at their supplement label. It'll be similar to the nutrition fact panel. But so let's see. Again, we're going to need to see a statement of identity, the total quantity of the contents, 100 tablets or 60 tablets, whatever, directions. So how much is recommended to take, and then a supplement facts panel, so indicating per 1 tablet. Make sure you compare the serving size. It will usually be the dosage, but compare the serving size to whatever the recommended directions are, because sometimes the dose is to take 3 tablets but the serving size, yeah, so the serving size should reflect that, but sometimes it doesn't. And then you can see the total quantity of the various micronutrients. Like this looks like it's a multivitamin. Oh, it says so up top, multivitamin supplement with ginseng. And then the percent daily value. So this is where you can see the amount in this supplement relative to the recommended dietary intake or adequate intake for that micronutrient. So this is interesting, I guess, with the exception of magnesium, niacin, and vitamin A, this supplement is giving you 100% of your daily requirement for all these other micronutrients. And this obviously isn't all of the micronutrients that we need to consume, but looks like a good, mostly complete list here. Then there's also going to be a section for any other ingredients that are in here to make this a product. Again, going back to Unit 1, I encourage you to often refer back to that website, the Center for Science in the Public Interest, and their page called Chemical Cuisine, and go in and research some of these additives to this supplement or any supplement that you might be taking, and make a decision for yourself, an informed decision to say, are these additives things that you want to be putting in your body on a daily routine basis or not? And if you don't want to, then keep shopping around and see if you can find a different product that's going to be a little safer or healthier for you, or better yet, try to get foods in your diet that are going to provide these nutrients. And then, of course, on the supplement label, we do also need to have the name of the business or manufacturer or packer or distributor, as well as their address. So dietary supplements are also relatively new in the grand scheme of things. So their regulation is kind of somewhat new as well. So in 1994, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act was passed, and it classified supplements as foods, not as drugs, meaning that their regulation will be different and distinct from drugs. So regulation of supplements is less than the regulation of many drugs. The FDA does not review safety and effectiveness, nor do they test supplements for safety. Interestingly, companies are responsible for reporting safety issues to the FDA. The FDA does have some power because they can take some steps to remove supplements from the market if they determine that the company hasn't provided enough information to make this product seem safe or be safe for human consumption. So just going back to selecting supplements or thinking about supplement intake, know that supplement regulation is pretty loose, I guess we could say. So there isn't even necessarily a guarantee that what you're taking has any effectiveness or any efficacy, and there's definitely no guarantee that it is safe to consume. Whereas, again, food, we know that most foods, especially unprocessed, are quite safe. So just keep that in mind. And then if you are going to take some supplements, because I'll show you on the last slide here, there are some cases where supplement use might be recommended or worthwhile. So there is something called the U.S. Pharmacopoeia Convention, and they're sort of an independent body that has established their own standards for supplements in terms of purity and quality, as well as labeling. So you can look for the USP seal of approval on your supplement product if you decide that you are going to take supplements. And this, again, doesn't necessarily guarantee safety or efficacy or effectiveness, but it at least gives you a little bit of a little bit greater assurance than not seeing this at all. So then a 2-page chart here. In situations or individuals individuals who may benefit from or situations in which supplementation might be recommended or might even be beneficial. And then it also indicates the specific supplementation. So it's not just saying across the board, all infants need to supplement, or across the board, all pregnant teenagers need to supplement with everything. It's saying in these specific cases, here are specific supplements that might be recommended. So newborns, especially newborn who might be born via C-section, getting a dose of vitamin K can be helpful and is common practice. What else to point out here? So pregnant teenagers might want to consider supplementing with iron and folic acid. Anyone anticipating or trying to become pregnant might want to take a full prenatal supplement just to be sure. During pregnancy and lactation, focusing on a select micronutrients that are really critical for that fetal development. Let's see, anybody recovering from a serious illness, that's actually interesting, just supporting reestablishment of health, but not necessarily taking these multivitamins for long term, just to reestablish health after surgery or illness. Anybody who has HIV or AIDS or any other wasting diseases, anybody who's addicted to drugs or alcohol, again, multivitamin supplementation can be really helpful. I don't think they put it here, but, oh, no, it is sort of. People who have had portions of their intestinal tract removed. So again, anyone who's undergone a sort of bariatric surgery, or anybody who has a malabsorptive disease. Like for bariatric surgeries, oftentimes B12, not oftentimes, I'd say almost in every case, B12 is recommended actually as a supplement for life because the lack of significant portions of the stomach lead to significantly decreased ability to digest and absorb B12. Vitamin D, this is a big one in our part of the world. Supplementing vitamin D during the winter months when we have low sunlight exposure. Elderly folks may also consider a multivitamin supplement, especially B12. And then following a vegan diet. So again, kind of person specific, but I would say zinc can be a good one. Vitamin D, again, during the winter months, I would discontinue during summer months. And just depending on the diet, I mean, most likely B12, but riboflavin, calcium, iron, if they make sure to get specific foods and enough that are going to provide these various nutrients, then there isn't a need for supplementing. But these would be the top 6 to consider. Okay, so that's it for part 2, a little bit shorter than part 1, but I'll scroll through these last few pages of review questions. So as always, take your time and pause the lecture and test yourself on these questions. And email me if you have any confusions or want to confirm anything. All right, thanks for listening, and we'll see you for chapter 10.